Good afternoon, Jeffrey Hopkins. How are you?
Very well, Alex, yourself?
I'm excellent. I'll welcome everybody to the School of Thought podcast. It's November 19th. Holy time flies. I'm sitting here with Jeff Hopkins, the principal educator at the Pacific School of Innovation and Inquiry. And we do this podcast, just so you know, people, every Thursday from 4 till 6. Sometimes we finish early, sometimes we do a double header, but we're here again in the saddle. I'm Alex Van Tall. I'm a author, parent, journalist, coach, contract writer. I was a classroom teacher for a number of years, and I have an abiding interest in education. And this is a very interesting educational model that Jeff has created. And so this is where we pick it apart and get deep into the convictions that have driven Jeff and his team to create such an extraordinary and really powerful and human-centric model for education. So welcome and thanks for joining us. Jeff, today we're going to talk about conviction number 11, which is readiness must be an ingredient in curriculum design. So we've touched on this one a little bit before, but give me off the top of your head, what's the nutshell of this one?
I guess the nutshell would be when we design curriculum, we tend to try to guess what a bunch of people are going to need based on their age and maybe what the curriculum has had prior to that. So if you're in grade 10, social studies, what did you do in grade 9? You're probably ready for this now. And I think it's the wrong assumption. And I think it drives teachers crazy, and they feel bad about their own practice sometimes when it has nothing to do with what they're doing and how they're working. It's all about that assumption that a group of people is ready for the same thing at the same time.
Yeah, and that is that's a definite limiting thing in schools. Like when I think back to my experience largely as a middle school teacher, but also bits of high school and bits of primary, that was one of the most frustrating things when I was operating a classroom, because I knew some of my learners were ready for a given concept. Others were way ahead of the curve and ready for the next concept. And some were at the frustration level where they were signaling all kinds of ways that they weren't neurologically, behaviorally, emotionally ready to dig into that particular thing. So I think probably, most teachers would agree with you on this ache that, readiness must be an ingredient in curriculum design. So what do you say? What should we say instead of trying to get everybody going down one road at the same time?
Well, I think this is what stops people, is that the alternative to that is, rather than saying we're going to prepare a curriculum for a group of people because of a grade and an age, and we're going to group everybody together in a room and teach them the same thing at the same time in the same way. And then anyway, I'll get into adapting and modifying later, but that versus, recognizing, I was going to say to you when you were talking about the people not being ready and neurologically and all sorts of things, it's almost like they're different people with different individual lives.
That's weird, Jeff. That can't be true.
I know it shouldn't be, just because it complicates everything. So if that is true, our paradigm is completely wrong. And so the answer is you create a curriculum that's kind of hiding in the background, and you pull from it when someone is ready for it, and you attach it to things that they're maybe already doing, and you stretch them to wherever the next place is when they're ready to be stretched. And you don't stretch them when they're not ready to be stretched. You're looking for those teachable moments and those just-in-times. And that's not to say you're not doing things as a group, and it's not to say people can't have a common experience, but maybe how they are accessing that common experience or the goals they have in that common experience could be completely different from another person's.
Right. Past the place where they're comfortable. That brings to mind the zone of proximal development. So I don't think we've talked about that yet on this podcast. So walk us through, what is that zone of proximal development? What should teachers be looking for when they're ready to bring something to a learner?
Yeah, I mean, one part of the concept of zone of proximal development is just that people have a sweet spot that's kind of perfect balance between being over challenged and kind of scared to death, and shutting down as a result of it, or being under challenged and bored to death and shutting down as a result of it. Somewhere in the middle is that nice balance of, I've had enough experience and I have enough prior learning. My schema is ready to absorb a new thing. So I'm ready for that new thing now, or I'm interested in something and I need to know that thing to be able to do the next thing that I'm really motivated to do. That's kind of gets into more like where proximal development and flow fit together with Csikszentmihalyi's concept of flow, which is you can go really deep into something if you're motivated to do it, and it provides you with a great source of happiness, and it's like time flies by and you don't even notice and all those sorts of things. But if you can hit that sweet spot for people, they're ready to go. Like they're really ready to go. And that horrible, like 4 lessons you did to try to teach people how, I don't know, trig functions work. When they're suddenly ready to need them for, like they need them for something, and they're also ready neurologically and everything else, it's 5 minutes. It's a piece of cake.
It's
And
a piece of cake, yes.
Yeah.
Now, okay, I just want to talk about that zone of proximal development. It's depicted in different ways pictorially, but the way I have seen it is, I mean, you can kind of liken it to a bullseye on a dartboard, can't you? Like there's the center, which is what your comfort zone is and what you already know. And then like if you imagine it just being 3 concentric rings, although they're all gradations, but in the center it's what you know. In the second ring that's the zone of proximal development, where a learner or where you yourself are ready to move out of what you already are comfortable with and you're ready to move into the learning. And then the next concentric ring is, this is too hard and it's discouraging and I've now hit the frustration cap. So you're saying we want to keep that learning in that middle zone, right? In that second concentric ring.
Absolutely. And when I talk to parents about this, I'll ask people, what does it look, actually learners too, I'll say, what does it look like when you're in the place on this 3 concentric circle version of the zone of proximal development, when let's say you're so far outside your comfort zone that it's like way too much. You just don't know what's going on. It's kind of threatening. You don't think you're competent of it. You don't think you're gonna be able to do it. What behaviors do you see as a result of that feeling? And people say, oh, you're going to get, misbehavior. You're going to get people, shutting down. Teenagers might just not go to that class. They just skip it, things like that. And then I say, okay, then what does it look like at the other end when someone's so bored because they know they're just going to do something they already know really well. They did it like 5 or 6 years ago. They completely understand it. There's no new ways of thinking of it. And interestingly, the behavior is exactly the same. The misbehavior, not showing up. And so some of the things we battle in the school system where we talk about like, behavior issues or discipline issues have nothing to do with the learners. Well, they do have to do with the learners, but they have to do with how we decide to serve the learners. And if we keep pretending that we can just take a whole group of people randomly, or not completely randomly, but because they're all born within, 12 or 15 or 16 months of each other, and say they're all ready to do this thing right now on this day at this time because it's block B and that's when we do that. And then you go, I wonder why some people can't do it. I wonder why some people aren't engaging. Well, what a surprise. If they all were, that should be surprising.
That would be totally bizarre. That would be like, I don't know, Stepford Wives or something.
Yeah, it would be really creepy. And sometimes you do it and you feel great about your, your lesson. And sometimes I know that myself, I actually like lecturing. I think it's really fun. Yeah, it's really fun. But, I know that's not the way. You can't teach a lot of things that way. It's not a great way to teach a lot of things. It's got its place. So sometimes if you do like a beautiful lecture and it's almost just more like a infotainment, and everyone's like in the palm of your hand because you've just done a performance almost. And you go, yeah, that was a great lesson. Well, maybe you certainly engaged people, but you may or may not have actually helped anyone learn things or tended to that, what you're actually there for.
Yeah. So, wow. Okay. 3 things in there that I want to talk about. I'll probably forget number 2 and 3 because I'll go on. I'll go on number 1 for a while. No, I remember being, like I could remember math in grade. I think I started losing my way in grade 9. And not because I'm not capable of mathematics, because I believe that almost all brains are capable of all different kinds of learning. It just depends on how much you care. But I really wasn't ready. And the pace of the class went too quickly. And then, you know, for a child who doesn't have, I see this with my grade 8 child who I'm homeschooling this year, he's missing some of the building blocks that came in grades 4, 5, and 6 and 7. And so we're going back and rebuilding those. And part of that is because that brain wasn't ready, like I wasn't quite ready in grade 9. Part of it is because there is a lack of those building blocks, which was also holding me back. And it's not always the fault. I mean, it's sort of like you can't really even determine the cause all the time, because quite often, you know, in block B, when you're learning, you know, you've got your 45 minutes to cover whatever, that's all you've got as a teacher. And so you really need to assign homework for the children to get the, you know, like basic facts, or practice with long multiplication. Like that actually sometimes does have to be drilled. And if a child's missing that, they're not going to be in any zone to gather the next level of learning. So there are limitations on, you know, the practices we implement. There's limitations on the time we're able to actually get things done, and certainly limitations on which brain is ready for that next step. See, I told you I would go on for a while for number 1.
You're right, you got it. It's interesting when you talk about limitations, because I think the limitations are ones that we have also created. So if you go out one more layer and you go, well, why on earth would we create a system with those limitations in it? That's crazy. If this is how people learn, and that's actually what we're supposed to be doing, why did we create a system that contains it that doesn't allow that to happen the way that people learn? And so, but you're right, we are absolutely limited in most school settings in our society.
Which is why, you know, like when I think about your school and the model that you follow, it is categorically different, right? You can't just change a timetable and change the teaching structure. You actually have to climb out of the pool and go build a new pool, right?
Time to build a new pool. Yeah. And so, yeah, that's true.
So another thing I was going to say, I could really soapbox on this one. It's the whole age grouping.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like,
soapbox
here we go. But like families, I don't know if I came across this in a sociology book or like a education text, but it was when the author was talking about the discrepancy between how learning happens in a family unit and how learning happens in the classroom unit. So it must have been an education reading that I'm drawing on, but they're so different. Like here you have, in your classroom, you might have 20 or 22, or if you're really unlucky, you've got like 34 souls of the same age, but that doesn't mean jack. Like they could all be 12, and you've got some who are really, they're 7, right? Because they've got all kinds of stuff going on in their brain, in their home, in their emotional life. And you've got others who are, you know, they're pretty much ready to walk through across the stage and get their diploma. So the groupings in and of themselves in the classical system are flawed. You know, I surprise, shock, and piss off a lot of parents, I think, or I did when I was actively having conversations about class groupings, because I was always like, I like splits. I like split classes.
So do I.
They give a little more choice. They're a little bit tricky for teachers to manage, but they're just that much closer to natural or what works well. And I'm thinking of Montessori, like the Montessori method is to loop children. Yes. So they loop them in bands of 3 years. And when my sons were at a Montessori school, my youngest son got, you know, a looping group that had a variety of ages. And you never hear the children complaining about this.
They don't. The only people that think it's unusual is someone who didn't have that, and they think there's something wrong with it. But if that's what you do, that's what you do. And you're right, it's more like how the world is. If you go and meet somebody somewhere, you want to talk to, you go, when were you born? Were you born between, were you born December 31st and such a thing? Oh, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you. I'm not allowed to talk to you. I'm never going to be able to talk to you, actually.
It's
So
very artificial. Workplaces aren't arranged that way. You know, there's very little now in the way that school is arranged that is reflective of what's going on out there.
quite true. It's actually funny. A meta kind of version of this. We were talking in a psychology session the other day about human development. We were talking about the Piaget stuff about brain development, and having fun, all the ways you can fool babies because they don't know how to do like object permanence and conservation and all those things that they can't do yet because their brain actually just hasn't developed yet. It's not they're not dumb. It's just they don't actually have a physiological ability to do that because that part of the brain isn't there. Um, while we were teaching that, there were, people were asking questions about things like the zone of proximal development because our kids know a lot about it because we talk about it too much at the school. But
Right.
it kind of struck me as they were saying that because there were learners in there who were looping, like it was looping that reminded me of it. There were learners in grade 12. They're in their final year of high school, and they were in this class, and they have actually been in a psych session before where we talked about this topic before. But now they were really, really interested in things like the development of white matter and pruning and neuroplasticity. Whereas the first time around, it was just like, oh, isn't that interesting? You can fool babies. You can break a cookie in half, and they think they got 2 cookies. Awesome. I'm going to use that when I get home. But they just the idea that what they were ready for, part of that was about being neurologically ready for different ways of looking at the very same subject matter. They're all in the same session together, 13 to 18-year-olds, but they're all there coming away with different things, and they might come back to it again later and come away with a different thing next time.
Yeah.
So that we've given ourselves permission to do that, recognizing that there are going to be differences.
Yeah. And you sort of hold sessions where the conversation can go into the corners that people want the conversation to go into those corners, right? And learn what they need and want to learn.
Definitely. And so when the questions, everything we do is question driven. And so we often get learners here who say, in my old school, I used to get in trouble for asking too many questions. And I cannot tell you how many times I've heard that. I'm like, what are you talking about?
Wow.
So when people ask questions in our sessions, that drives the session. That's where we go. That's how we find the edges. That's how we plan the next session. That's how other people go, that's interesting. I think I might look into that. It's so important. And so again, that paradigm back to the classic one where it's like, here's the things I want you to know. We even call them learning objectives. We even will say, these are the things you need to know when you leave, not other things, these things. Yes, of course I plan, and of course I say, here's the things I want to make sure that I get across to you. But at the same time, I'm absolutely wide open for if people are ready for something else, they're ready. And if they're not ready for what I'm doing, I'm not going to do that because that's a waste of time. So if I said, I've done this before, I had this planned, I think we need to go back and do a little bit of work in a couple of things that are going to provide context before we come back to this topic again.
And I'm imagining that at PSI, that's the acronym for Pacific School of Innovation and Inquiry, there is no sense of shame, and there's no saying you can't, or you failed to do this, or you should have been able to do this by now. I imagine those words don't actually happen in the classrooms.
They don't. In fact, we have to reteach that there isn't shame because a lot of the learners think there is. And so they will come in and they kind of hold their cards pretty close to their chest because there's things that they know that they're not comfortable with, or maybe they're wondering if the way they're thinking about something isn't the way they're supposed to be thinking about something. So they don't ask questions until they get comfortable and realize, we kind of keep telling them, if you haven't experienced something, you haven't experienced it. Doesn't mean you're wrong. And if you didn't learn something, that doesn't mean you did something wrong. It means we haven't figured out a way to help you learn it. You weren't ready yet. It isn't important to you yet. Whatever it might be, it doesn't matter.
Those are great messages for kids to hear, because there's so much, like when you said supposed to, I wrote those words down. Like there's a lot of supposed to in the world of children. And as adults, you often hear people, there's this saying, don't should yourself, right?
Yeah.
Easy on the word should. And so we've got shoulds and we've got supposed tos that are, pressing down on these young people who are at the same time forming their understanding of the world. It's quite different from adults. We've already kind of created our schemas, and so we hear should and supposed to, and we question it. But little people, and by that I mean anybody between 0 and 23, really, when our brains
Yeah,
stops developing, but definitely between 0 and 15, when they're really making sense of the world. If they get a lot of supposed tos and a lot of shoulds and a lot of sort of shame for not hitting milestones, that is what they onboard into the way they understand themselves and the way that they think they have to move through the world.
absolutely. They're going through synaptic pruning at like later in that adolescent time, and if the pruning is being guided by restrictions that are incorrect, they're going to prune too heavily,
Yeah.
or incorrectly, and they need to leave some of those pathways open, as long as possible, so that when they're pruning, they still have the ability to go down some of those paths. In psychology, also, again, this goes along with Piaget. We were talking about this concept of the American question. And the American question in Piaget developmental psychology is, as soon as Piaget sort of defined roughly what development looked like at certain ages in a very general way, with a massive kind of margin of error, as his subjects were two. They were both his daughters, and that was it. And he based everything on two people.
I never knew this. How did I get
Yeah,
through a whole degree without knowing this? Oh
he
my
just
God.
happened to be really good. Like his kids,
Yeah.
I guess, they were pretty typical because he was
Yeah, they
pretty
must
dead
have hit
on.
all the stages. Yeah.
Yeah, he did a good job. But the American question is, if someone is supposed to be able to do X by the age of 7, well, I'm going to try and make them do it by the age of 6. So the American question is, how can I speed up this development? Because faster must be better. And Piaget, of course, in horror, is like, it isn't. It's like, it isn't better. You don't make you don't need to make something happen faster and pretend that that's better. And I always talk to kids about, a lot of
It doesn't
culture.
work for soup.
Finland's a good example where it doesn't work for soup. In Finland, when you learn to read, you don't learn to read when you're really little. You learn when you're 7. Here we
Oh,
even have a thing called success by 6, which is,
yes.
if you aren't reading by 6, you're in big trouble. And it's
Yeah.
like, that's not true at all. That is completely false. But
No.
we feel like there's this race and almost like an urgency, and there is not. So I think, again, readiness is about getting away from asking those kinds of questions of your kids, of yourself, and just saying, paying attention to them and saying, let's see if they're ready for this yet. Yep, they are. Let's go. Let's see if they're ready. No, they're not. Let's not do that right now then. Or if they're not ready, what is it? Something emotional that we need to tend to? I guess that's the other part of this is, some of it is helping people become ready for things, because it's about anxiety or emotion or learned helplessness or whatever it might be. So we might have to do work to help people be ready for something too.
And yes, exactly. It's almost like undoing the prior damaging assumptions that have been onboarded, right? Like you were saying a little while ago about, you have to work with new learners who come in from a different school, and they've got all these ideas about what they should know, and they're kind of trying to hide that. So yeah, you have to do some sort of repair work. I wanted to go back to the synaptic pruning,
Yeah.
because that's a very interesting thing that happens, and it happens in the adolescent brain primarily during sleep. So I want to talk about that a little bit, because for a couple of reasons. One is that sleep is very badly understood in our culture. It's badly practiced and badly honored, but it is absolutely essential to neural development, and it's essential to neural functioning throughout life. It doesn't matter how young or old you are. Like your brain, when you sleep, it's actually detoxifying. But in the adolescent brain, that pruning happens at nighttime. My understanding from what I remember is that it happens in the white matter, which is the deeper, not like midbrain or cerebellum, but like you've got your gray cortical matter that covers that's your cortex. But then just below that, it's all white matter, and that is major synaptic connection. So tell me a little bit more about the importance of making sure that the right things are happening during that pruning time.
Yeah, well, like, so the white matter are the axons, and the reason they're called white matter is because they're surrounded by a myelin sheath, which is white because it's fatty, and so they really are white. And so you're that yeah that part that's just embedded in the gray mushy part, the more fleshy part of your brain are the synaptic connections, and they're white. They're nerve lines of nerve cells, and so the way we learn is that we create connections between parts of our brain and other parts of our brain, so that our experiences and our memories are essentially captured in those connections. And so we have pathways that we go down to recall things, to remember, re-experience, synthesize, evaluate, compare, look at analogy. All of that is all about those
Remember faces. We were talking about remembering faces. That requires multiple parts of the brain, even that simple thing.
Yeah, exactly. So if you are going down one particular road, literally, actually, if you're going down one particular road all the time, your brain says those other roads are not important. It doesn't seem like you're using that information. Snip, 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 and it literally physically prunes that white matter away, because it's way more efficient for you to, when you're trying to get your thoughts together, to not have to kind of evaluate the value of a million neural pathways, maybe only 500,000 neural pathways. And it saves time and energy and all sorts of things. So if we are not helping people kind of explore all the different ways that you could think about something, and you're making it sound like there's only one thing to learn or one way to think of something, you're almost forcing a pruning that doesn't necessarily need to happen, and could actually even be stopping someone from building a new way of looking at something that could be really valuable to them or others.
Yeah. Wow. I had not thought of it that way before. I'm glad you sort of built that out. I mean, I think because our brains are a black box, we don't see what is happening. We don't see what is important. We don't see, like, wouldn't it be cool to see the nerves actually firing, right? As though you could almost see it as like a lit up screen. And I mean, you can see on a functional MRI and things like that, but for most of us day to day, we can't see that. So, and that means we're kind of oblivious to how important every small thing is to brain development. Yeah.
It's true. I went to a brain development conference in Vancouver that Adele Diamond put together, who's a leading neuroscientist in Canada. And one of her guests, who was a presenter at the conference, had a video of an MRI, fMRI, showing a pathway being made in a brain while
no way.
And it was incredible.
Yeah.
And you could see the axon reaching to try the dendrite on the end of it, trying to reach out to connect with another axon, another nerve cell. And it was amazing to watch. It was like, it's actually happening. It's a physical process. When you're learning, it's a physical process. And I think you're right. We're a black box. And if you stub your toe, it hurts, and you can see that you did it. But you don't see what's going on inside your brain. Like, it's too invisible. That's true.
Yeah. And so so get your sleep, people, and easy on the starch, because it collects and it makes plaques in your brain, which leads to anxiety. I could go on. There's one thing here on the notes, when you had done your bullet points supporting this conviction that readiness must be an ingredient in curriculum design. I want to touch on it before we close down for the day. And you were talking about this idea, connecting with the idea of learner agency and emergent learning. We've been talking about emergent learning the whole time, here, like, what are children ready for? But talk a little bit about that learner agency piece.
Yeah, well, this is also really interesting. We do a lot of education. We do to people. We don't do it with them.
Yeah.
And even a lot of learners they come to school and they're like, I wonder what they have planned for me today. I guess I'll find out when I get there. But if you actually share some of that responsibility with the learner, and they begin to develop an understanding of what's next, what should be next, how do I know that's what should be next, how do I know what I'm ready for, what are my goals in my learning? So I still, it's so funny when you see new learners come, but a lot of the writers especially, you'll say, what would you like me to look for when I'm assessing your writing? And they're just like, what are you talking about? And they've never been asked a question like that. You say, well, I can read it. I can say good, bad. I can say 8 out of 10. Whatever you want. I can use a red pen even if you want me to. But is there something you're trying to do here? What's your goal in your writing? What are you working on right now? What do you feel like you'd like to get better at? What can I give you feedback on that could help you? And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, actually, could you see if my dialogue is plausible? Is my plot, airtight? Have I left any weird holes? Great. And then so all of a sudden they're focusing on something very specific that they've decided they're ready to learn, or that they're working on or practicing, or whatever it might be. And we're following their lead by providing assessment that helps them learn it. So giving them benchmarks to say, yes, I think you are getting better at this, and here's how I know. And you can talk about it in very explicit terms, as opposed to just good, 8 out of 10, which isn't very helpful. The other part of the agency is when a learner said, I want to do this today. That's what we want people to do in their life. How many job descriptions do you see where they say must show initiative? And then but they're in a school system where it's like, I'm going to tell you what to do and how to do it and when it's due and what it should look like. And then we want people to show initiative. Well, what initiative do they need to show? Really? So now the agency is theirs, and they say, today I'm going to do this, and I'm ready to do this, and maybe today I feel like writing for 4 hours, or I don't feel like writing anything today. Today I really want to understand this bit of math that's kind of been niggling at me. They own it.
That's a huge thing in terms of them being able to determine their readiness to take on new concepts, or to reach for new ways to practice or ways to apply. But it also has really big implications for, like the word agency is actually excellent, because that is what the world requires of adults. However, I would venture to say most adults still aren't fully in their agency and don't actually realize that they are in control of and in charge of their lives. So this is a really valuable thing to be helping young people understand at the age of 14, 15, 16, 17, right? Like the more responsibility, there's the word. Taking responsibility, for your learning in this case. So you sort of start them off small with a concept or something they're working on, and then you build it out from there, and they can kind of generalize from, taking responsibility with an inquiry to taking responsibility for their choices and their decisions and their initiative at work. I mean, it's a nice feedback loop that really does position them well for addressing the 21st century.
It really does. And then the nice thing about being given that opportunity in a school setting is we're there to support them while they're taking that responsibility. So if something goes sideways, we're there to catch them. That concept of scaffolding that we've talked about before, like, we're not just kicking you out of the nest and saying, good luck, you're responsible for everything, I hope it goes well. We're actually saying, try this, we're right here, right behind you. And if that's not the right choice, you can take a step back, you can take a step sideways, we can talk about a different way of approaching it. Maybe that we have 4 people in our school who teach math. Maybe you've got to go to person number 3 now, and 1 and 2 didn't do it for you. All of that kind of stuff. We really want to make sure people feel supported and not just like it's all on you.
Yeah, interesting, because I do hear stories sort of secondhand about people who graduate from high school and then show up at university, and people who graduate from university and college and show up at the job waiting to be told what to do. And, like, I don't know, you tell me, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and I'm thinking there is not a leader in North America or anywhere in the world who is able to check in on all employees and make sure they all know what they're supposed to do. Like, if there's a time for initiative and a time to be learning initiative and agency, it's now.
It's true. It's absolutely true. And I think I might have mentioned the word learned helplessness before too. And this is part of the agency as well. If someone's, behavioral training has been that when they try something, they're told it's not correct. And then they tried something else and they're told that's not correct, until pretty soon they feel like no matter what it is they do, it's not going to work. they develop that sense of learned helplessness, which is why bother doing anything? I can't do anything right no matter what I try. And in a school system where someone else is calling all the shots and your readiness never lines up with what's being done, your questions don't match with what the lesson's about that day, or the lesson that day doesn't match with what you're able to comprehend or want to do, or are even emotionally ready to do, you can develop a real sense of learned helplessness, like no matter what, I can't learn things. Or even no matter what, it doesn't matter what I do, it's never going to be good enough. And so if school begins to hand back that agency to say, you take control of that. You don't need to be in a position where that's the case. People tend to they dig themselves out of those learned helplessness holes. And we see people in those learned helplessness holes that come into us in grade 9. And we help them dig out of them. Agency is a big part of that. And readiness is a really big part of agency, or recognizing readiness.
And just the last thing you said, it reminds me that of a common question that comes up for your educational model. Like when I go and talk to people out there who are interested in educational change and really actually doing the change that we need, depending on their degree of readiness, right, and where the conversation goes, I will often get the question of, or the comment of, well, that works for, that inquiry works for some people, but, my child is really, really happy at school and really engaged. And I don't think everybody, flourishes under that environment. And I'm always thinking about your analogy of how, how we come out of the womb nothing but learners, right? Like all we want to do is experiment and try. And, you always talk about a baby when they're learning to walk.
Yeah.
Well, that baby doesn't have to have a set of requirements. That baby sure as hell isn't going to walk if you say, you are now 18 months old and it's time to get going. So I expect that you're going to be motoring around the living room by next Friday afternoon. Like that doesn't even happen. You can't, the baby has to be ready.
That's right. That's right.
So this is an approach of learning. I can see where you have to undo a lot of learned helplessness and prior learning to give your learners the faith that they actually have all the tools they need. They just need to, or maybe the tools they need are just they're all around the room. They can just go grab the right tool they need at the right time. It's a real shift.
It's a big shift. It's funny. There's a term. A good friend of mine and a real mentor in this area, John Abbott, used the term, and I believe he coined the term, cognitive apprenticeship. And that for me kind of made a big bell ring, which was not kind of like free for all, do whatever you want, or I'm going to do everything with a group of 30 kids because of their age. It was like, oh no, they're on a cognitive apprenticeship. It's like a one person at a time thing that a person who maybe is just a little further down the track in a particular area of learning knows something about it and can kind of pass on that knowledge, but that person's going to become their own journeyman or woman in that area. They're going to have their own, put their own stamp on it, have their own way of doing it. They're an apprentice. They're becoming competent at a thing, whatever the thing might be. So for me, it's sort of not about not helping people get good at something, or pretending that there's that saying, people don't know what they don't know. So we're not just saying to people, do whatever you want, and we're not going to point you in any particular direction, because that's not true either. But it's kind of an apprenticeship model where it really is one person at a time. And sometimes people are in groups for other reasons. So, yeah.
Do you remember the John Abbott book that came from? I know you and John Abbott have had a long-standing personal relationship, and he has indeed been a mentor for you. But where do we see cognitive apprenticeship? Is it in is it undereducated?
Yeah, a couple of places, but where he fleshes it out the most is in overschooled but undereducated.
Overschooled but undereducated. Okay.
Yeah, which he actually, it's funny. The book is excellent.
Yes.
The title was chosen by the publisher. He was appalled that that's what they called the book, but it's okay. He knows what publishers are trying to do. They're trying to like pull people in, and he said, he just thought it was so negative and such a horrible thing, but it actually does really capture what he's saying, quite well.
Yeah, no, that is a good read for sure. And it's a good, it's one of the starting places for people who are curious about this kind of model.
He wanted to call the book Born to Learn. And they were like, and so they had to have a more provocative, grab a hold of you by the lapels and pull you in kind of title. He was just so angry.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. Well, I'm with the publishers on that one. I'm like, as a journalist, I'm like, yeah, you gotta get the hook to get people's attention, right?
Yeah, it's true. No, I think it worked out okay, but yeah.
Off the top of your head, are there a couple of other books, not necessarily by John Abbott, but if a person was curious about, even if it's on today's topic about readiness or just in general about education transformation, where would you point them?
A classic, and probably everyone's been there because I think almost every person on the planet has watched one of his YouTube videos, but Sir Ken Robinson, the late great, sadly, Ken Robinson, who talked about, people aren't ready for something just because of their date of manufacture, as he put it, and this sort of getting away from this factory model of assembly line, people moving down an assembly line that can never be stopped or altered. So that he's right. So Ken Robinson it's always worth going back to and looking at.
Can I just barge in here and make an observation? Sir Ken Robinson was never even a teacher. Why did it take somebody, he's fabulous, but why on earth do we not listen to educate? Anyway, whatever.
I don't know.
He made the point that the world needed to hear is that schools kill creativity. That was the title of that TED Talk that I think is number one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Beautiful. And another person is Yang Zhao, who is a researcher in the United States, very good writer, very good speaker, prolific writer of books and articles and blogs. But he talks a lot about the mismatch between what the education system is doing and what the world needs. So he's kind of on the other side of it, not so much what the individual needs, but what the individual has to offer the world and how the school system is kind of squandering the potential and not matching kind of what the world needs with what we're teaching people or how we're teaching people.
So true. Like I've heard that name many times from you and from other people in this space, and I think it's high time I went and got one of those books. Because boy, and it to me it feels like that gap is widening, right? What schools are teaching and what the world needs, it's like just like iceberg pulling away from the ice wall.
It absolutely is, and I think even our hope in BC when they redid the curriculum was that it would be more interdisciplinary, so that because I think one of the things we need is not so much new things, but a new connections of things, a new ability to see how things are interrelated. And we kept the siloed subject style of curriculum where there's social studies and there's math and there's English, and rather than kind of blending those together in the way that I think we need to be now. Sometimes they talk about being I-shaped learning versus T-shaped learning versus, I can't remember what the other one is, M-shaped or something, but the idea that you need to be broad and deep, and you need to see how each of those things is connected, not just going deep in a single line. They have to be connected together. And so, we don't do that in our school system at all.
Yeah, we're still, like you said, we're still super much inside those silos.
Yeah, very much.
I'm out of questions. I mean, wow. How does that ever happen?
I don't know. It's good. It does happen.
I would like to observe today, though, I look like a talking head. I just realized I have this blue sweater and I have my blue wall, and it's like Alex has just been floating around on this blue. That's pretty cool, eh?
I really like it. I'm going to do that next time. I'm going to do the green screen one though, so I'm like really just can't see anything.
I think that'd be fabulous, and then you could have like Mars behind you at some point, and we could put you on a beach.
Yep, I'm doing it. A beach would be nice during this pandemic and not being able to travel anywhere. Maybe just a fake beach in the background would do the trick.
That would be fabulous.
Yes.
All right, Jeff, we'll connect again next week. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Alex. Great conversation.